Hi there, everybody. We're going into chapter 23. We're getting close to the end of the material. In chapter 23, we're talking about diseases of the digestive system. You should remember that our GI tract is filled with microorganisms. 100 trillion, or 10 to the 14 organisms. Such a large number. It's hard to even fathom that number. This is just a little joke I got off the internet. Just remember, you're not alone. You're walking around with tons of organisms. So on to chapter 23 material. We're going to pass over the beginning, which starts at the front end of our GI tract and discusses conditions in the mouth. A bit about biofilms and periodontal disease, gingivitis, dental caries, and problems in the mouth itself. This is interesting and important to everyone's life, and I encourage you to read over the section just to be exposed to the information. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to go over it for the purpose of testing you. We're starting this section by talking about gastric ulcers. The organism, Helicobacter pylori, is the organism that's responsible for causing gastric ulcers, stomach ulcers. If you ask your grandparents what causes ulcers, probably they're going to tell you stress. For a long time, that was the conventional wisdom. Stress caused stomach ulcers. But eventually it was determined that stomach ulcers were largely a result of infection with Helicobacter pylori, a spiral-shaped bacterium that infects just about half the world's populations. So clearly, there is more to developing stomach ulcers than infection with the organism, since half the population does not have stomach ulcers. The definitive link to stomach ulcers was made by a researcher-physician who had evidence for the link, but was not being taken seriously by the medical professional establishment. The researcher that first hypothesized this said that Helicobacter pylori was found in all of these different ulcers he was examining, so he thought this was the cause. But the ruling hypothesis was it was stress, so nobody really was paying much attention to him. What he did was really not something that's recommended, but he basically applied Koch's postulates to himself. First, he had an endoscopy to show that his stomach lining was intact. Then, he drank a solution containing a large number of Helicobacter, developed ulcers, and documented that with another endoscopy. He then took antimicrobials to clear the ulcer and demonstrated that it worked. This got a lot of attention. Eventually, medical professionals did pretty much universally accept the idea that Helicobacter pylori is the cause of gastric ulcers. Helicobacter employs urease as a key virulence factor. Remember, urease cleaves urea and produces ammonia, a basic chemical. The ammonia is able to neutralize the stomach acid right around the bacteria, and this allows the organism to move right through the gastric juices. It likes to burrow its way through the mucus, which lines the stomach epithelium and then breaks down that mucus lining, and then you end up with stomach ulcers because the gastric juices will break down the stomach lining. So that's the overview of Helicobacter and the relationship to stomach ulcers. Gastroenteritis is an inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract. There are several organisms that are capable of causing this condition. In general, gastroenteritis is accompanied by some common signs and symptoms. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, and cramps are all characteristics that go along with gastroenteritis. If the case is more serious, it will lead to dysentery, which is characterized by blood in loose, frequent stools. You can think of dysentery as a very severe case of gastroenteritis. Not all organisms that cause gastroenteritis can cause dysentery. Often, organisms transmitted in a fecal-oral route that are responsible for foodborne illnesses lead to gastroenteritis. Food safety dictates that, in general, one should be cooking food hot enough to kill microbes that are contaminating your products, and then keep products cold enough during storage to prevent multiplication of any surviving or contaminating microbes. This is a reminder that you need to keep cold foods cold, at refrigerated temperatures, and you need to cook foods to an internal temperature that is hot enough to kill organisms. Holding temperatures must be hot enough that organisms that may have survived can't multiply. The first organism in this section is Shigella. This was one of the enterics in the Gram-negative unknown project. Shigellosis is caused by various species of Shigella, and these organisms have a very low dose of infectivity. You might only need 200 organisms to initiate an infection. This is a very small number of bacteria. Shigellosis actually can lead to dysentery. The virulence factor that leads you to shigellosis is what's called Shiga toxin. This toxin is capable of stopping protein synthesis and therefore, obviously, killing affected cells. The organism is associated with what's called the 4 F's: food, flies, fingers, and feces. These are the mechanisms for transmitting the organism. Remember, you need a very low dose. So, if a fly, for example, lands on a contaminated material, such as maybe fecal material, and then lands on your food, it can transmit those 200 plus organisms to your food. You will become infected when you ingest them. Likewise, we already said feces is a vehicle, and fingers touching various things and then touching your food or touching your mouth is a possible mechanism to transmit enough of these organisms. There's a lot of cases worldwide, and in other parts of the world where dysentery and diarrhea causes a lot of childhood deaths because of dehydration. Children die because they do not receive medical intervention when they're suffering the effects of dysentery and dehydration. This infection is responsible for a lot of deaths worldwide. While this is a fairly common infection even in the United States, we have good health care and young children do not die of dehydration here. Okay, so that is shigellosis and the 4 F's. There are several other causes of bacterial gastroenteritis that are common. You might have heard of what's called traveler's diarrhea. That condition is oftentimes caused by specific strains of E. coli that are capable of producing a Shiga toxin. Remember, most E. coli is friendly, commensal. They're living in our gut without causing problems. But we have pathogenic strains, and they typically have virulence factors that they've acquired with various plasmids. One common virulence factor is Shiga-like toxin. There are some E. coli strains that are very virulent and can cause very serious infections and possibly even death. The strain E. coli 0157H7 has been responsible for numerous outbreaks that include fatalities. These particular strains of E. coli are pathogenic, not your friendly E. coli, and they have acquired virulence factors on plasmids. They contaminate food or water, usually because fecal material from an animal is contaminating what is ingested. These strains do not seem to cause animals a problem, but they definitely cause humans a problem. Another very common cause of gastroenteritis is a bacterium that a lot of people have never even heard of. This gram-negative spiral bacteria is Campylobacter jejuni. It's pictured over here, and it's kind of interesting looking with its flagella on each end and a slightly curved cell. It's very common, especially in poultry products. The chicken in the supermarket in one study was harboring this pathogen at a level of 81%. Most chicken had it, and this is one reason cooking poultry thoroughly is so important. You need to be sure to eliminate the pathogens before eating. This is a potential source of contamination in your kitchen. Number one, if your chicken isn't cooked enough. And number two, if you're handling the raw poultry meat and then you're handling other items, or that raw meat comes in contact with counters or utensils and they aren't washed well, then these can become a fomite that transfers the pathogen to something like your salad vegetables that you're cutting on the same surface or with the same utensils. You have to be very careful about how you're handling raw meats and raw poultry in your kitchen, or you risk transferring something like Campylobacter to your meal. I wanted to mention that this bacterial cause of gastroenteritis because it is so common, but it's unfamiliar to most. Salmonella is the next topic. Salmonella is different compared to many other bacteria in that there are only actually 2 species, but they have been divided into what are called serotypes. Serotypes are grouped based on surface antigens, serology, antibodies, and antigens. There are over 2,000 different serotypes of Salmonella. Salmonella are referred to by their serotype, which is often named after a major outbreak of gastroenteritis they were found to be the etiologic agent of. Interestingly, the serotype is capitalized when written, unlike the species, which is lowercase. Salmonella serotypes can cause varying degrees of GI infection. Most serotypes cause a common bacterial gastroenteritis. However, typhoid fever is a very severe form of salmonellosis, and that has a very high mortality rate of up to 30%. There's really only 2 different strains, S. typhi and S. paratyphi, that can cause typhoid fever. With these infections, individuals can become carriers, so the organism can remain in the gallbladder and periodically shed into the fecal material. If that person is not very hygienic, then the fecal-oral route transmits the organism to somebody else who will become infected. Have you heard of Typhoid Mary? She was the carrier of this serotype of Salmonella in the days before there were antimicrobials available to treat it. She was responsible for quite a few deaths. You should read her story. Look her up. Typhoid Mary has a very interesting but sad story. Mary Malone, who became known as Typhoid Mary, was a carrier of typhoid and infected lots of people with typhoid fever. She worked as a cook and must not have had hygienic habits. She did not believe the authorities who caught up with her and the trail of typhoid infections. Remember, this was back in the day before they had treatments, and not everybody really understood epidemiology. Epidemiology was still fairly new. She refused to stop working as a cook, and thus the authorities forcefully quarantined her in an institution where she lived out the rest of her life, never accepting she was the cause of all the deaths in the families she worked for. There are many other serotypes of Salmonella, like Enteritis, which we worked with in the lab. Most of these serotypes cause more mild foodborne illness called Salmonellosis. Don't get me wrong, Salmonellosis is not pleasant. The cramping and nausea and diarrhea can be terrible, but it's not likely to be fatal, just miserable for a time. Typically, antimicrobials are not needed, but rehydration therapy may be necessary. Interestingly, reptilian pets can harbor Salmonella. If you have a pet like a lizard or a pet turtle, these can harbor Salmonella. Other animals can as well. If you're handling your pet and then you don't wash your hands well, you can give yourself a Salmonella infection. I've known individuals whose kids had pet lizards, a bearded dragon specifically, and then the kid came down with Salmonella. There have been reports in the literature about pet turtles harboring Salmonella and causing outbreaks in the household. Kids and hygiene. They're not the best at that, right? So try to be sure to have kids wash their hands after handling pets, especially before eating. Salmonellosis is still a large problem responsible for a lot of outbreaks. These really haven't declined in the last 15 years, despite efforts to control sources of Salmonella infections. There's been some pretty big studies of all the different foodborne illnesses in the United States, and the FDA, with all of their rules, regulations, and recommendations, were able to decrease the foodborne illness incidence for a lot of different organisms. But these efforts were not really effective in reducing Salmonella. Salmonella still causes 1 million infections in the United States each year. Various sources harbor Salmonella. Some of the foods may be familiar. You may already associate poultry and eggs with Salmonella infection, and they still are a very large percentage of the sources of Salmonella infections, about half of them. But did you know that foods like vegetables are also responsible for outbreaks of Salmonellosis? There was an outbreak associated with almonds not that long ago, so even dried nut products, which possibly got contaminated after harvest, can be a source. Salmonella that pops up in a lot of different foodborne outbreaks involving a wide variety of products. This graph includes all the different sources, including reptilian pets and the chickens that people raise in their backyards. Backyard chickens are a known Salmonella risk for the families of these animals. Next, we'll move a little further into the GI tract, into the colon. In this case, we really are talking about what's commonly an Antimicrobial-Associated Diarrhea. This is C. diff, properly named Clostridium difficile. This gram-positive anaerobe is a very big concern in hospital settings. This organism is one that a lot of people may come in contact with, but if you have a well-established and functioning normal flora in your GI tract, it's probably not going to cause you a problem. However, if you're taking antimicrobials, you're going to disrupt the microbiome in your GI tract. Now, you have the potential for becoming colonized with and experiencing an infection with the Clostridium difficile endospores that you come in contact with. An individual on antimicrobials is a fairly common scenario in a healthcare setting. A lot of people are taking antimicrobials because they're sick in the hospital. And then once they come in contact with C. diff, they now have a big problem. The organism is known to produce quite a few toxins that kill cells in the colon. This cell death also forms a pseudomembrane, like what happens in the throat with diphtheria. This process causes inflammation, and you can see these numerous lesions in the colon of this individual. This is very miserable. The long-term diarrhea and cramping is very hard on people, and sometimes the infection is deadly. The more traditional approach was to try to treat this infection with antimicrobials, but that doesn't always work. The normal microbiome is still impacted, and the endospores themselves are resistant. So as soon as the antimicrobial is stopped, the condition can return when the endospores germinate and begin to multiply again. One of the treatments that's gaining a lot of attention and has a great success is what's called a fecal transplant. You may have heard of it, and there are companies trying to develop more standard treatments that will pay healthy and screened individuals to provide fecal material so that they can isolate normal flora as a treatment. It may sound kind of disturbing, but the science shows it works. The process involves taking a healthy individual who is screened to be sure they don't have any pathogens, and they isolate the normal bacterial population from their fecal material. This is transplanted into the patient's colon to try to reestablish a normal microbiome. It does work. C. diff is a very devastating infection. While it's sometimes fatal, even if it's not, it can be very uncomfortable with continual cramping and diarrhea that just will not relent. Imagine never being able to go far from a restroom because of the problems with your colon. It really makes life miserable for those suffering from the infection, even if it doesn't kill them. This treatment is welcome relief from those experiencing the infects. So that sums up C. diff. Okay, I think I'll stop this video here and pick up with video number 2 for chapter 23.